Hello, everyone, and welcome to Wolfed, a podcast for engineering leaders and for those aspiring to deliver products and outcomes that matter. I'm your host, Christopher Cohen, and today I'm excited to speak with Artem Fishman, that's the CTO of Dow Jones, about how he became an executive for one of the largest online media organizations in the world and changed the way people engage with their stock portfolios. In today's episode, Artem will speak with us about his career journey from the New York Times to Dow Jones. And he'll tell us about how he overhauled Yahoo Finance's entire infrastructure and some of his main takeaways from that experience. We'll then get his perspective on the balance between risk-taking and delivering business outcomes before closing out our talk with learning more about why he adapts his leadership styles at each new organization. Our conversation will be packed with great stories and insights for engineering leaders. I can't wait to jump into it. And in fact, what are we waiting for? Let's welcome today's guest. Today, we have the distinct privilege of introducing you to a remarkable individual whose journey through the tech landscape reads like a roadmap to innovation and leadership. From revolutionizing Yahoo Finance to driving technical innovation at LinkedIn, our guest has left an indelible mark on some of the biggest names in the industry. He was vice president at Thomson Reuters, CTO at SoundCloud, and in his current role as CTO at Dow Jones, he's navigated complex technical and managerial challenges with finesse, consistently delivering high-impact solutions and pushing the boundaries of what's possible in technology. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Artem Fishman to the program. Thank you so much for joining us today, Artem.
Chris, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
Well, I am very excited to have you here. This is really, really cool. And I'm going to start with you the same way that I start with everybody because I'm boring that way. But I'm just always really curious to hear what was your first exposure to software engineering and what made you decide to pursue it as a career path?
Yeah, I started out when I think I was 8 or 9, back in what used to be Soviet Union. I grew up in this little tiny country called Moldova, which is like nestled between Romania and Ukraine. And I started out on this little machine called Vector, where you used audio tapes to load, uh, into like 4K memory chip. And yeah, I would load up BASIC, and then I would load up games on top of that. And then after that, I started writing some games and became a big, BASIC geek. So that was the start. And then later, I got a Spectrum, and then later I finally, got a legit machine with floppy disks. But yeah, that's how it all started for me.
That's amazing. And so, I mean, doing that so early in your life, did it strike you right away that this is something you wanted to do forever for your career? Was it kind of something on the side? What did you think?
Not at all. I think when I was a teen growing up in the US, I thought I was going to be a doctor, a medical doctor. I was convinced that, computers are just a hobby and I'm interested in them. Like I was, playing with IRC and, like all the scripty kiddies, that used to like bomb on IRC channels. So that was me. And then I think later in college, I became convinced that computer science is for me.
Was that your major, computer science?
So I started with a computer science and a literature double major. I know, medical doctor, starting with computer science and a literature double major. But I was just, I was playing around with things. Like I knew that I had some time to think about things before, potentially going for medical school. But it was very clear to me after just a few computer science courses that I was having fun.
Which is, of course, very important, especially as we think about something that we're going to do long term. So from there, what did your first dev roles look like? Like what, I'm assuming you started as an individual contributor. What did that look like? And when did we start getting this idea that maybe management or people leadership would be for you?
Yeah, my first couple of roles, obviously, were IC roles. I started in this company called Viewpoint. It was part of MetaStream, Meta Creations. It imploded in 2001. It was a really cool company. Well, I think it actually imploded a little bit later, but sort of, natural layoff in around 2001 period. And then I went to work for Columbia University, and I was an engineer there, working in the geophysics research space. And I spent 4 years there, then went to the street.com, spent a year there as an engineer, spent another year at Goldman Sachs, went to New York Times. So like, I think I had about 6 or 7 years of IC experience under my belt before I decided to go into management. And I think for me, it was really after having seen so many engineers that are better than me, and sort of watching engineering teams deal with sort of blockages and bottlenecks, I could see how I help with bottlenecks and how I help teams break through that, but didn't find myself being the best engineer in the team. And I'm a little bit of a competitive type, so I like sort of being the best at the thing that I do. And so yeah, it became clear to me that I'd rather just help teams get their work done and unblock them than be an average engineer.
So you felt like maybe that was where you had something special that you could bring to the table versus actually sitting at the keyboard and writing code.
Yeah, I think that I watched so many times, like it was easy for me to sort of see product ideas more holistically and sort of like what needs to be done. And that was easier for me to do than for some of the other members of the team that were, I think, smarter than me. And so that's where I gravitated. Yeah.
That makes sense. So as you kind of stepped into those more managerial roles, did you feel prepared for that? Did it end up blindsiding you? Like what caught you off guard versus what did you think you were actually really good at?
Yeah, I think that in the beginning, I'm thankful to my first, boss who allowed me to take on the manager role. His name is Brad Kagawa. He, encouraged me to take a smaller team, right, and just like get used to what the task is. So I had a team of 3, 4 people that I was very, very close with, and that allowed me to still write a bunch of code and sort of lean into the early versions of the manager that I was. So I think that was extremely helpful, right? Sort of like not just going and like I watch a lot of tech companies take new leaders through a training program and really start them out at just a manageable number of direct reports. Like it really takes time to figure out what value you bring to the team as a technical leader. And it takes some time to divorce yourself from writing a lot of code and the imposter syndrome that you start feeling of like, wait, I'm a manager just having one-on-ones and sort of negotiating a roadmap for the team, but not contributing to the actual product being built. That stuff takes some time to break through.
Yeah, and I know that can vary from role to role or culture to culture, different companies. What is your thought on the responsibility of a manager in terms of like actually contributing to a product, to a code base versus taking that full, step back and really just kind of guiding the ship without actually fingers on keyboard?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that, what leaders are supposed to do for teams is definitely, I mean, in the different levels, right? Like, for example, when you're a frontline manager, you're helping the team organize themselves and keep things coherent and not, like try and avoid chaos and bring some rigor and basic processes to the table. You're also helping represent the team in key conversations, right? Like you are speaking on their behalf, right, in key conversations around planning and what the team is going to tackle. So that representation is an important part of what you do. And you're also starting at that point to grow careers and invest in people. But frankly, right, like I think that a lot of what you do in the early days is just helping make sense of like what happens on a day-to-day basis, right? And helping close out milestones and periods for the team so that they feel the recognition and they feel the pace of of their journey in their careers. So I think that's how it starts.
That makes sense. And I guess as we kind of continue down that path, your role starts to grow and you're leading larger and larger teams. I mean, obviously then we start, encountering these challenges of scale. What did that look like in your personal evolution? How did you end up tackling when it comes from, managing a team of, I don't know, 5, 10 engineers to managing now thousands at your current role, or not just engineers, but people? How do you tackle that? How does that change your day to day? What do you think?
Yeah, I think that as you start managing larger groups of people, you realize that you can only keep so close to the details at that point, right? Like it's very reassuring for an engineer to be in the details, right? Because like such a huge part of what we do is watching the outcomes in real time, right? Like we recompile code, test run, right? Like we see what happens. Um, and the further and further you step away from those things, the more theoretical things get and unsatisfying. And I think that what I learned through me scaling myself as a leader is like my key job right now is encouraging people to take risks, right? Like a lot of what people do in the engineering profession is sort of de-risk and predict, what things might look like as the project progresses, and they over-engineer things, right? And so a lot of what I think a leader can be doing is providing sort of safety and eliminating fear and encouraging some risk taking. A lot of also, I think what a leader does is guessing, but guessing at the right time, right? Like developing instincts to sort of like stop the over engineering process and sort of like go like, let's just make a call, right? Like let's make this decision. I am well informed, right? Like obviously it's that balance of like, when am I well informed versus I'm well informed enough to make a decision now instead of just spending, a lot of time on the decision making process beyond the point.
Yeah, and you mentioned like you have to develop that instinct. Is that simply experience? Is there, is there a certain amount of reading you can do or consulting with others who have been down this block? Like how do we develop that instinct to guess at the right time?
Yeah, I think the only answer I have from my perspective is, yeah, that is a bit of experience that you accumulate over time. And it's almost like it's instincts, right? And you lean into them, and instincts are probably, I think Daniel Kahneman did this very well. He educated people that instincts is just pattern recognition. And yeah, a lot of what we do is we've seen a bunch of things, we pattern match and encourage people to go quicker rather than over engineer. Yeah.
Yeah, and you mentioned also encouraging people to take risks or engineers to take risks, and it's interesting because of course there's this often a focus on deadlines and on deliverabilities or deliverables, I suppose, and that can so clearly be contrasted with this idea of like taking chances, innovating, even if it comes at the cost of having nothing to show for it. That seems like a very difficult balance to strike. I wonder if you've got any insights into how we navigate that.
Yeah, I think that I wouldn't necessarily encourage engineers to take risks and introduce higher crash rates. Like, I think I mean more like product risks,
Okay.
right? I do think that stability of the product, right, and good foundations are really important. Like taking risks and sort of like flipping things that are unstable or not performant isn't what I would encourage.
Mhm.
But I think a lot of what happens inside engineering teams is sort of like trying to interpret data that comes in from usage of the product and deciding like, should we build this thing or not? And that's where I encourage risk taking.
That makes sense. And you also mentioned that like as you step away or as you get further away from the details, things get more theoretical, and you even described it as unsatisfying. I wonder how in your role that you can measure these outcomes in a way that makes you still feel like you're checking certain boxes or that you're bringing to the table what needs to be brought when things do get so theoretical.
Yeah, I think that I mean, obviously, a lot of modern product teams have tons and tons of quantitative feedback from users on how the product is used, right? And we pore over this data and understand it really well. But fundamentally, there are still so many times when you just have to make a call, even against the data that you're seeing. Um, like I think that when you're doing growth engineering, quantitative insight is probably core to how you do things. But when you're doing a lot of like consumer engineering or like B2B product engineering, the lead times to feedback are much longer in the B2B space. And so there you're taking lots of bets, right? So yeah, I think that we all try and educate ourselves with data, and yet we're all sort of taking a leap of faith whenever we're shipping new functionality.
Gotcha. Something that you had mentioned to me before we started recording is we were talking a little bit about your role at Yahoo Finance, and I even saw on your LinkedIn that like one of a big initiative you had taken on there was a complete modernization of their technical infrastructure and product vision. Uh, on a broad level, I'm wondering like how do we even approach such a gargantuan endeavor? But maybe more specifically, I'm wondering too like what were your big takeaways from tackling 20 years of tech debt, and maybe what would you do differently if you were reliving that experience today?
Yeah, that was a daunting exercise, right? Because first of all, I didn't do this alone. There were so
Of
many
course,
people
yes.
involved, and they were incredibly talented folk. Um, I would say that, just to give you a sense of the size of the project. So Yahoo Finance as a business, by the way, all it does is it ingests market data and fundamental company data, as well as content, and then puts ads on top. And that's the business, right? Um, that's really the nature of what the product is. And what people sometimes forget is that the Apple Stocks app still gets all of its data from Yahoo Finance. So it's a million RPS endpoint, actually. Like million requests per second. That's when I was there. That's what we were serving. And so when you um, replace the system ground up and basically say, look, 17-year-old thing, we're going to fully throw it out and rebuild the entire consumer experience. It's a daunting exercise, especially when you try and do it within a year. I mean, it was a little bit over a year. And I think the biggest challenge, by the way, when we launched was actually not the scale in the end. The scale actually worked out fine. The biggest challenge was the who moved my cheese response from the users who were like, I hate what the new product looks like. Like there were definitely a couple of performance, problems, but like, again, just ingesting 8 billion ticks a day, creating time series for them, creating charts, serving Apple, just like the sheer amount of stuff that happened technically in order to enable all this was really mind boggling. But in the end, it was like, my charts look different and I don't like it. Um, and or the way you rank news now really drives me nuts and my portfolios are broken. Portfolios were dearly loved functionality. But yeah, like in terms of like technical decisions made, I don't think there were, like uh, things worked, and worked well. It was a really talented team, and we were playing around with Redis at the time and some other things that were very new to the company and were a little bit experimental. But in the end, I'd say no regrets technically. Um, on the product side, I think what I've learned is like big bang product launches are painful, especially when you are like revamping a product and launching, like something that is dearly loved and people already use, and you're about to like pivot entirely and give them a completely new experience. Don't do that in a big bang way. Get there slowly.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder too, when you've got such a large user base who has so much feedback right away, how do we know the difference between, okay, this is growing pains, this is something that people are going to get used to and eventually they're going to love, versus, hey, we screwed something up here and we need to go back to formula in terms of what was working. Like, do you have a sense of how we figure out that signal?
No, I think that uh, we sat for about a month reading feedback that kept coming in, very loud voices. And it was hard to read because we doubted ourselves a lot. Like, did we do the right thing? And in metrics, we actually saw decline in usage. Like we saw the most committed Yahoo Finance users turn away. And within the month, right? Like that is not what you want, right? Like you do not want to alienate your most loyal base of users who are obsessively using the product for many hours a day. That was very hard to watch. And we maybe had some perseverance, and maybe that was dumb perseverance. Maybe we should have just rolled back, but we got lucky, right? They came back. I think a lot of what we were doing is actually dealing with the feedback, right? And quickly responding to the feedback and saying like, what, we're listening and we're going to strip the fixes to the things that you're calling out one by one. So that's, I think that helped. And also reaching out to like core users and having conversations directly and listening to them is really important too.
So ultimately, I mean, these changes are being made for a good reason, and so it sounds like if we're keeping that in mind, there's iterating that we can do with the user base, with the customers, taking feedback to heart. But I mean, is there ever a point where we just turn the ship around and say like this didn't work, or was that ever in your guys' sights at any point, or was it always clear we've got a target, we're on the right track, it's just a matter of tweaking?
I think that it was very clear to us that the technology stack underneath the product needed to go. So there was no turning back
Gotcha.
to that stack. We needed to revamp the technology. I think we definitely had some questions about like, did we really mess with the company pages too much? Did we mess around with portfolios too much and sort of like amp into watch lists a little too much? We had those thoughts. Like I said, I think we got a little bit lucky that we quickly resolved some of the user feedback through a couple of tactical fixes, and we also were lucky that the product is so sticky, right? Like what it provides to people is sort of invaluable insights into company fundamentals and performance and markets fundamentals and performance that, yeah, I would say we just got lucky.
Gotcha. A little stroke of luck always helps here and there.
Yeah.
So from this role at Yahoo, you took on your first full CTO role, with the title change at SoundCloud. I'm curious, and forgive my ignorance, if you felt that there was a really substantial difference in your day to day as a CTO versus as a VPE, or was it more of just a title shift and it really depends on the organization? What did that look like?
No, being a CTO is a different job than being, I think, a VPE. At least in the tech company, right? Like being the sole VP in, let's say, a startup can be very much a CTO job. It's just like different companies call it a different thing.
Sure.
But yeah, like becoming a chief technology officer and suddenly dealing with cyber concerns, dealing with infrastructure and data center and like sort of colo/cloud environments, and just thinking about how much you're spending on all of these things, and managing. Like at Yahoo, I literally didn't have to worry about like what we're spending on infrastructure. We were abstracted away. Finance team would show up when we're overspending and have a conversation together. But yeah, here you're running the full, you're fully accountable for the spend, fundamentally the growth of the product. So you're thinking very holistically about all things. You're also starting to think a lot about the culture, right? Like literally the buck stops with you. You're the person that is going to evangelize new processes, culture, technology. You're the person that's going to form a technical strategy, and teams often require that of the CTO, right? Like some sort of a vision of like what will be different 3 years from now. What should we be adopting versus taking out of out of our practices, and yeah, you're sort of putting in place and shedding light onto like that 3 year view, and managing and finances very closely, and partnering with the executive team on what we're building.
With all that in mind, was this very much on your radar as you kind of moved into that role, or did you feel blindsided by a lot of those new responsibilities?
I did quite a bit of, I was already part of the CTO club at the time, in New York City. And so I was close to a bunch of CTOs, and so very privy to the discussions and sort of concerns that all of them typically have. And so when I was making the decision, I definitely did quite a bit of research, both into the company that I'm joining, because I was moving to Berlin at the time, for that with family, um, and also what's ahead. So yeah, I felt like I was coming into something that I understood.
Which is good. We don't want to be totally unaware of what we're just kind of taking things up on a whim, right? But that said, still, I'm curious, like, does something stand out in your mind as, okay, you're a new CTO, something that maybe a mistake you made that shaped how you thought of it moving forward?
I see. Um, I don't know if it was a mistake. Like my SoundCloud story was such that when I joined the company, the company faced, I joined, and then the company suddenly faced a very difficult period. And so I had to lead the company through a massive contraction, and then, literally laying off half the company in one day, 3 months after joining. And leading the company through a turnaround, I actually, yeah, I don't think that this is sort of like you learn what it's like to lead a company, and that you make these incredible hard decisions that affect people's lives in in a very sort of fast-paced environment. And I think what you learn is like there isn't somebody to protect you from all of this. Like you're it, right? Like you are making, and that's why I've developed like this incredible respect for founders and how they start companies and how they grow companies and give them life. Um, yeah, the constant stress of decision making that is company breaking or making type things is intense, and you don't research, from your CTO friends, right? Like you learn that when you're in the seat and when you're in the daily, in a daily way facing headwinds and trying to make the right decisions for the company.
Yeah, that sounds overwhelming. I'm I'm struck by like how you managed to navigate that, and I know you said like there's only so much you can garner from your community, but at the same time, you mentioned that you did have the opportunity to already be part of the New York CTO Club as you moved into that role, and now you're a co-chair of that club. You're deeply involved in the tech community, sharing ideas and expertise with fellow technologists. I'm wondering how, in maybe some other ways, that your involvement there has enriched your perspective on engineering leadership, and maybe any advice you might offer to aspiring technology leaders looking to engage with similar communities in their area.
Yeah, I think that all of us, the CTO Club in New York has been around for 20 years. And I think it has about 160 members right now. And these are, some of the most incredible technical minds in New York. And the club also have a bunch of sister organizations in different places, like in San Francisco. I started one in Berlin, actually, and it's
Oh,
thriving.
awesome.
Um, and so being an executive or a CTO is a very lonely job, right? And you're lacking a community. And so what the CTO Club often is like that place that, where you get to talk about all of the dark secrets of your job. And it's supposed to provide that safety for you. And so the way the New York CTO Club works is like Chatham House rules. So basically no attribution, right? Like you can say what you want to say in the club and get tons of advice. Um, the other thing that I like is like no pitching in the club, like no sales pitching of any kind. Um, because right, like these are busy folks and they come there for the community.
Mm-hmm.
And the distribution list is also extremely helpful, right? So like there's a meeting once a month that takes place with a pretty influential speaker typically. But then on top of that, there's a pretty vibrant distribution list where you get to ask for advice in an async type of way. And that's super helpful when you're looking to understand either a new piece of technology or, looking for vendor advice or like just looking for career advice. That type of stuff is invaluable. So yeah, hopefully I'm answering your question about sort of like
Yeah,
what
you
I
are.
get from the club.
Definitely. And I'm also curious how you got involved there in the first place. You said you weren't quite a CTO yet. Like, what does that look like as new members kind of join?
Yeah, the way the club works is somebody's got to invite you. So somebody who's in the club has to invite you as a guest. And then you show up for a very long time before you become a member. You sort of have to show that you're engaged. But also, even when you're invited as a guest, like there is some criteria, but like the club doesn't have a lot of rules and processes, like because
Mm-hmm.
that's just boring, like
Sure.
especially for this group of people. So typically, when you get invited, yeah, you're probably serving as a senior leader leading a large team. So yes, you don't have to have a CTO title. You can be a
Mm-hmm.
VP, but that's probably it, right. Like there are some senior directors out of very large tech companies. But that it probably stops there. You're probably leading at least 40 to 50 people in order to be right. Yeah.
So to pivot a little bit, I know, I mean, you've got tons of experience managing teams both at startups and leading large scale initiatives at established corporations. So that means, navigating a lot of diverse organizational structures. How do you adapt your leadership style to kind of like effectively motivate, empower teams across different company cultures and sizes? Does that something stand out to you in terms of a playbook that you have, or how you analyze and act on that?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question because obviously, like I've been in media companies, finance companies, consumer tech companies, and they all very much have different sort of rhythm and the way they do work. Um, I've been super privileged to try a bunch of them, and so now it's become quite a bit like it's easier for me to pattern match and see
Sure.
like what I've seen before. How do I adapt? I think that, for example, when I tried the first tech company, I was just so fascinated to learn. Uh, so I wasn't adapting; like I was excited to learn about how the company operates and does what it does. So I would say that uh, for me, it's just been super interesting to touch a finance company and see core operational rhythm there. And after that, I went to a media company like New York Times after Goldman Sachs, and just watch completely set of different incentives and different goals. That's the stuff that really gave me uh, I was just fascinated by the transition and learning about different modes of working.
It makes me wonder, like, okay, so you're working in all these different kinds of industries. You've got this opportunity to see, like you said, how things tick here versus there. Do you find yourself leveraging kind of these cross industry insights to drive innovation, foster collaboration? Like what does that help bring to the table for you?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think that in a large tech company, you see such massive scale that when you are, in a smaller company, you bring a ton of value right away. Um, both, like I remember when arriving at SoundCloud, it was so interesting to see the lack of an experimentation framework and sort of ability to easily roll out A/B tests. At Yahoo, it was so effortless, and so it took some time to figure that out. Seeing how ads work at Yahoo, helped a lot with figuring out how ads work at SoundCloud, right? Like so,
Sure.
um, like lots and lots of bits um, that I was able to bring with me from a large tech company. But I think that also right now arriving at Dow Jones, right, and helping with some of the AI capabilities that we're exploring, yeah, definitely coming from LinkedIn and playing around with all of these concepts for a couple of years, there's a lot that you get to use.
Do you think that kind of broad level of insight is really crucial to being a successful CTO? Is there value in really being very, very focused and specialized versus someone who has a lot of experience in a lot of different areas?
That's actually part of my life's dilemma is sort of like broad versus deep decision.
Hmm.
Right. I think so. I consider myself pretty broad, right? Like I like breadth, and sort of like touching a little bit of everything rather than going deep. Um, but I think that I've seen some amazing leaders who get a ton of gratification from going super deep and then zooming back out and doing it again and again. For example, I found that I think at LinkedIn actually we very much encourage leaders to go deep, right? Because you occupied, you know, often you were a very senior leader in charge of something that was quite constrained, and you had to make that quite amazing. So
Hmm.
you had to go deep. Um, did that give me joy? No, because I actually like touching lots and lots of different things. So I think it's a very personal thing that also has to jive well with the company, right? And what the company wants out of its leadership. That is not to say that I don't like, like some people when they hear me say that I don't go deep, they're like shocked. They're like, "What are you talking about? You're in every document. You're like, looking at PRs, like you're all over the place." Yeah, yeah, sure, but I've seen deeper. Um, and if your question is like, what's more important for a senior leader? I would say not, there are two different modes, and both are encouraged depending on the company and what it wants out of its leadership.
Gotcha. So very context dependent, it sounds like, but
Yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah. I think I would say a lot of tech companies do expect depth, not
Gotcha.
just breadth and just a little bit of superficial knowledge about lots of things is probably not
Hmm.
the way to go.
I see. Can you tell me, maybe, does something stand out in your mind? One piece of advice that you wish you had received earlier in your career?
Start with the punchline, I think, is a bit of advice that I received in my career that I found to be very valuable. Like as most people do, right? Like the way the message is delivered is like you start with a lot of explanations and then you finally Peter to the ending of like, so here's, and I remember Kerry Trainer, the SoundCloud CEO, he definitely encouraged all conversations to be like, let's start with the punchlines. Like
Gotcha.
TLDR, let's start here. And then take me on the journey after that. Like first tell me what you want to say and then get me, then we'll talk about how you derived that message and what got you there. I think that's a good one. Like a lot of what we do in companies is deal with communication dilemmas, right? And a lot of what we do in life right now is get just pounded by the information around us. Learning how to be super succinct and start with the punchlines and arriving to like that quick insight is a good thing.
I'm writing that one down for myself. I love that. Start with the punchline. How about, does something come to mind in terms of a personal habit, a personal routine, something that you feel has contributed to your success as a leader, maybe on a daily basis or maybe more broadly than that?
I think that what I am learning to do as a leader is how to do less things and really focus on the very important things, right? And this is like Peter Drucker's old, cliche advice. It sounds so cliche, right? It's like, just focus on the most important thing and do one thing at a time. But it is such a hard thing to figure out. Like being busy is easy, right? Like it's a super easy thing to do. You can get pissed off, run around from one task to another. But actually starting your day with an outline of the most important thing that you need to do today, and look at the thing that's happening this week, the most important thing this week and the most important thing this month, and sort of like aligning those things and spending your day on that it's a very hard decision to make and very uncomfortable. Like we all like to delay that thing. So the thing that I've been doing is sort of like constantly writing my list of 2 to 3 things that are important in the day, in the week, in the month. That's been helpful, but I can't say that I've gotten amazing at this. This is hard.
I mean, it's a challenge for sure. I like that you say, it almost sounds like a cliche, because I think there's a lot of cliches that we all hear and think like, yeah, people say that. And it's always that different moment at some point in your life when it hits you a different way and you realize, oh, this is why people always say that. Like, this is why this is such a cliche. So
Yeah.
I totally, yeah, exactly.
But being able to look at your calendar full of meetings and say, what was my list? And this day doesn't feel right. And being like, I'm going to blow up the day. That is a hard challenge, right? Of like, I'm not going to go to half of these meetings because I need to do that important thing today. Right. That is a very difficult thing to do.
It takes, I'm sure, a ton of practice. As you
Yeah.
said, you're still learning at being great at it. Yeah. Artem, I know you're very, very busy. I cannot thank you enough for spending some time with us today and digging in a little bit. I really just am blown away by your insights and everything you've spoken about with me. So thank you so much, sir.
You are way too kind. Thank you for having me at your podcast, Chris.
It's been my pleasure. And that'll do it for us today. We're signing off from the den of Wolft here, where we navigate the wild terrain of engineering leadership. So until next time, everybody, stay hungry for success. We'll see you then.